Life. Chapter 3. Sitting in the quiet of the Buddhist Society's library, evening after evening, Peter read a great deal of the Pali Canon, and even some of the commentaries. But sometimes his choice of reading material was more random, less organized. The books filling the library shelves covered a diverse range of Buddhist literature, and he tended to read whatever struck his fancy. Although the aim of the teachings was the same, the paths recommended to reach that goal varied. In the end, he began to feel a sense of incoherency about what he had imbibed in his readings. He began to feel unsettled inside. He was still stuck with the same predicament: how to decide on the correct path of practice. The mental confusion he suffered begged for a good teacher to straighten it out. By early 1955, Peter had settled on a course of action. He prepared to devote his whole life to the practice. He was not in a hurry. There was still a great deal to learn, and he could not expect to accomplish that quickly. Success was not simply a matter of spending time and energy. He had to spend his life. Not many people were willing to go that far. Knowing that he needed to find a qualified teacher to show him the path of practice, he believed that if he was earnest and ready to learn, then either he would find the right teacher, or that teacher would find him. Working in London as an electrical engineer, his mind was always divided. By day, he performed mechanical applications of routine engineering tasks, but his thoughts constantly gravitated toward the Dhamma. Peter had always been a quiet and socially reserved young man, and now he preferred to pass his leisure time perusing Buddhist texts in his room or at the library. He felt that he must practice before he could understand. The main thing was to subdue his desires and quiet his mind. He felt that the true significance of finding refuge in the Triple Gem could only be realized when the seeker was totally committed to persevering. He had to be committed not so much to formal acts of devotion as to striving relentlessly toward the realization, within his own heart, of the singular qualities represented by the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Since his arrival in London, a monastic vocation had been a vague possibility hovering on life's horizon. At times, he sensed the hand of karmic destiny orchestrating his future, as though ordination was somehow preordained, the natural outcome of his quest for the truth. Peter had always viewed ordination as a turning point, the line one crossed when one wanted to dedicate body and mind to Buddhism. As time passed, he realized he could no longer be complacent in his current situation. The time had arrived for him to step across that time-honored threshold and undertake the monastic life of a bhikkhu in the Theravada tradition. On his frequent visits to the Buddhist Society at Gordon Square, Peter had become acquainted with an Englishman named William Purfirst. Since they first met, William had traveled to Thailand to ordain as a Theravadin monk and taken on the monastic name Kapilavaddho. Bhikkhu Kapilavaddho returned from Thailand in November 1954 and joined two Sinhalese monks residing in the London Buddhist Vihara at Ovington Gardens, Knightsbridge, which had opened in May of that year. Quite fortuitously, Bhikkhu Kapilavaddho's arrival coincided with Peter's decision to seek the path to monkhood. The arrival of Bhikkhu Kapilavaddho offered Peter the opening he needed. Here was someone who knew how to go about it. Bhikkhu Kapilavaddho, whose own ordination had been the culmination of a long-standing movement by English Buddhists to establish a viable Sangha in England, welcomed Peter at the London Buddhist Vihara and encouraged his ambition to ordain. He would facilitate in whatever way he could. Peter was to learn, from this mentor's own practical experience, the life and the discipline practiced by Buddhist monks, ordained in the oldest lineage of Buddhist monasticism. Two more aspiring candidates for bhikkhu ordination, Robert Alberson and George Blake, joined Peter at the London Buddhist Vihara. Together, the trio took guidance from Bhikkhu Kapilavaddho and occasionally accompanied him when he travelled to give lectures. first at the newly initiated Meditation Week in Oxford, and later at the Buddhist Society's summer school. First Robert Albison, and then George Blake, ordained as novice monks at the London Buddhist Vihara, and were given the monastic names Theravada and Vijayavada respectively. Peter had a difficult time convincing his mother to support his vocation. But finally, on his 30th birthday, she conceded that he was sufficiently mature to choose his life's direction, and though she was deeply skeptical, she would not stand in his way. 12 days later, on October 31st, 1955, Peter ordained as a novice monk or samanera at the London Buddhist Vihara. He was given the name Panyavaddho, cultivator of wisdom. Many years later, Panyavaddho would explain his motivation to ordain like this. British society resembled a huge and tangled cocoon, in which all its members could see only other parts of the cocoon, while the whole thing whirled about without any purpose or direction, and nobody in it could differentiate right from wrong. People formed opinions and theories about almost everything, clinging to them tightly. Before long, everyone started arguing and quarreling, which eventually led to strikes and student riots and wars. The only sane choice was to tiptoe quietly out of that mess, while everyone else was too busy quarreling and fighting to notice. The 3 new novices took up residence at the London Buddhist Vihara. As junior-most members of the community, they were expected to strictly observe the 10 precepts, to learn the Dhamma and the monastic code of conduct from their elders, to attend upon the senior monks, and to prepare themselves to become eligible for higher ordination as bhikkhus. With the completion of all 3 novice ordinations, planning accelerated for a trip to Thailand. Their bhikkhu ordinations were to be held at Pak Nam Monastery, which belonged to the Mahanikaya sect, the oldest and largest in Thailand's monastic order. Bhikkhu Kapilavattho and his 3 charges boarded a plane in London on December 14, 1955, and flew to Bangkok. They were met at the Bangkok airport by a lay supporter who drove them to Pak Nam Monastery, which was located at the mouth of the Chao Phraya River. The abbot, Chao Kun Mongkon Thepmuni, met their arrival. Chao Kun Mongkon Thepmuni, known affectionately by his supporters as Lung Po Sot, began making preparations to confer higher ordination on the 3 samaneras. Pre-ordination celebrations were held at Pak Nam Monastery on the evening of January 26, 1956. The ceremony was held in an open-air courtyard, where tiered gold leaf and lacquered tables were piled high with flowers, monks' robes and ceremonial fans. Kapilavattho and the 3 samaneras sat in the middle space surrounded by a vast crowd of Thai well-wishers who offered token gifts to the monks and novices. The following day, the 3 samaneras were ordained together as bhikkhus, in a ceremony reported to be one of the largest of its kind in Thailand. Thousands of people crowded the monastery grounds to witness what they felt to be a historic event. The ordination ceremony began on the afternoon of January 27, 1956, with a long procession that escorted the monks and novices 3 times around the Uposatha Hall before entering the sanctified building. The procession started with the emergence of the English novices from the library building where they had resided since their arrival. The ensuing parade was led in traditional Thai fashion by a serpentine figure, the mythical Naga, in the form of a man draped by an enormous and colourful dragon's head, which spewed real flames from its gaping mouth as it bobbed and weaved through the crowd of onlookers. Scores of white-robed lay devotees, carrying folded bundles of white cloth, walked 2 abreast behind the Naga figure. The 3 candidates for ordination came next, walking slowly with deliberation and carrying lotus flowers, candles, and incense in their raised palms. Moving slowly with bare feet on warm tiles, the entire procession made 3 sweeping passes around the Uposatha Hall, then entered in a single file through a stone gateway into the consecrated space. A flight of stone steps led up from a small courtyard to the Uposatha hall, which by then was crowded with monks and lay devotees. The hall's oblong interior featured rows of pillars, forming an inner space with broad aisles at the sides. On stepping into the hall, one's eyes were immediately drawn to the great Buddha statue, elevated on its seat at the far end. And then, an instant later, to the abbot, seated amid the mass of offerings and array of multicolored flowers decorating the Buddha. The abbot, Luang Por Sot, sat calmly, facing the assembly. On either side sat elders of the order, each according to seniority. Junior monks, draped in yellow robes of various hues, sat in rows, down along the two sides of the long hall. In the middle of the hall stood the three young candidates for ordination, and behind the candidates the space at the entrance to the hall and in the aisles to the sides overflowed with lay devotees. An impressive sense of order and solemnity pervaded the inner sanctum as the proceedings began, precisely following procedures as they had been laid down nearly 2,500 years before. The three candidates were first ordained again as samaneras. The bhikkhu higher ordination followed, with Luang Por Sot officiating as the preceptor. The chanting instructor was Chaukhun Dhammatiloka, and the teaching instructor was Bhikkhu Kapilavaddho. After being presented with their monks' robes and bowls, the candidates approached the waiting Sangha together. The candidates received brief instructions about the ceremony before being given their official monastic names. The two instructors took the candidates aside to question them on their suitability for the monkhood. Being deemed suitable, the candidates each formally requested bhikkhu ordination from the assembled Sangha. For each candidate, a proposal was put forward and accepted with silence. In that solemn, time-honored way, the Sangha formally consented to receive Panyavaddho and his companions as fully ordained members of the order. Following his ordination, Bhikkhu Panyavaddho remained in Paknam Monastery, trying to master Luang Por Sot's unique meditation method, which was referred to as Sama Arahang. It involved seeing light nimittas in varying degrees of form and subtlety. While silently repeating Sama Arahang and remaining attentive to this internal repetition, the meditator mindfully focused on the following: first, the right nostril, then the corner of the eye, then to the center of the head, down to the throat, down below the navel, and then up to the solar plexus. After a time, the meditator should begin to see images of light. That, at any rate, was Bhikkhu Panyavaddho's understanding of the method. It was said that the first image to appear would be a sphere of light. From that translucent sphere, an image of the gross human body would first emerge and become visible, followed by an image of the subtle human body. The next images would then arise in their proper order: sila, samadhi, panya, vimutti, vimutti jnanadasana. After these 5 images appeared and vanished, other bodies would emerge in turn. The gross and subtle deva bodies, followed by the gross and subtle Brahma bodies, and then the Sotapanna body progressing all the way up to the Arahant body. Initially, Bhikkhu Panyavaddho found the practice helpful in that it led to a measure of mental calm and concentration. Beyond that, he was unable to make much sense of it. Because he could not figure out the reason behind the appearance of light images, he failed to understand what was meant to be happening. He did not know whether he should use his imagination to create the various images, or whether they were images inherent to the mind that arose spontaneously. Due to that uncertainty, he lacked confidence in the method. 2 months after their ordinations, Bhikkhu Kapilavaddho moved the 3 new monks to Wat Ta Tong on the eastern outskirts of Bangkok, and returned alone to England to resume his work of spreading the Dhamma. Bhikkhu Theravada soon became discontented, and a month later flew back to England as well. Bhikkhus Panyavaddho and Vijayavaddho then proceeded to Vivek Aram Monastery, a small forest monastery south of Bangkok in Chonburi province. By that time, Bhikkhu Panyavaddho had dropped Luang Por Sot's meditation method. He concluded that to practice a method that inspired little confidence was unlikely to bring satisfactory results. Realizing that he needed a reliable meditation technique to draw his mind away from its distractions and its impurities to achieve a more unified and refined state of mind, he turned to the meditation practice that the Buddha recommended: mindfulness of breathing. All the texts he had read stated that mindfulness of the breath was especially useful for countering a scattered and distracted mind, a problem that had plagued him from the beginning, and was thus a suitable basic practice for most beginners. At the same time, it restored his confidence to recall that the Buddha himself had expressly used mindfulness of breathing as his primary meditation subject for the attainment of Nibbana. Seated comfortably, Bhikkhu Panyavaddho began by placing his full attention on the normal cycle of the breath, each inhalation followed by each exhalation. Breathing was a fixed and ongoing natural activity. He needed simply to relax and focus his attention on the tip of the nose, being aware of each breath as it passed in and out through the nostrils. He made no attempt to control the breath. He wanted to focus on the natural and spontaneous rhythm of breathing and allow the resulting concentration to draw his mind inward. He had just begun to develop his skill at this when his stay at Vivek Aram Monastery was abruptly cut short. His companion, Bhikkhu Vijayavada, became very ill and needed urgent medical attention. Much to Bhikkhu Panyavaddho's disappointment, circumstances obliged him to hastily escort his friend back to Bangkok. Before they departed, the abbot, Ajahn, gave the monks a small meditation guide he had written. Several years later, Bhikkhu Panyavaddho would translate the guide into English as Handbook for the Practice of Dhamma. In Bangkok, Bhikkhu Vijayavada was taken first to the British Embassy. Following consultations with the staff, he entered an infirmary. His symptoms showed little sign of improvement, but nevertheless, Bhikkhu Panyavaddho stayed at the infirmary to help attend to his needs. When Bhikkhu Kapilavattho, then in England, heard of his worsening condition, he quickly flew back to Thailand, took one look at the situation, and decided to take both Vijayavada and Panyavaddho back to England immediately. The three monks returned to London in June 1956. Bhikkhu Vijayavada, still suffering the debilitating symptoms of a chronic illness, soon disrobed and returned to lay life. Bhikkhu Panyavaddho suddenly found himself engaged in the relative hustle and bustle of big city life. Swept up in his teacher's busy schedule, he dutifully followed Bhikkhu Kapilavattho to his appointments to meet lay supporters, give lectures, and raise funds for Sangha activities. One of the Buddhist projects closest to Bhikkhu Kapilavattho's heart was the Manchester Buddhist Society, which he had helped found in 1951. Aside from London, Manchester had the largest and strongest group of Buddhists in Britain. Bhikkhu Kapilavattho travelled there often to teach the Dhamma to supporters who gathered regularly at a rented house in a quiet suburban neighbourhood. Manchester lacked a permanent Sangha presence, and he decided to remedy that by sending Bhikkhu Panyavaddho to take over the day-to-day operations of the Manchester Buddhist Society. In September 1956, Bhikkhu Panyavaddho obediently made the long journey north to take up residence in the Society's rented house at Grosvenor Square in Sale, Cheshire. A clipping from the Manchester Evening News, dated September 21st, 1956, read, "In the front room on a quiet, leafy Sale, Cheshire road sits a young man of history. For he is the first resident minister in the English provinces of a world religion born about 2,400 years ago. Peter Morgan was the christening name given to Bhikkhu Panyavaddho, aged 30, who once worked as an electrical engineer. He spent most of his life in Llanelli, Carmarthenshire. Then he picked up a booklet on Buddhism. It interested him, and in January this year, he was ordained as a bhikkhu in Thailand. Now known as Panyavaddho, Pali for he who spreads and increases wisdom, has only 8 worldly possessions and exactly 227 rules of life. He owns 3 robes, a begging bowl, razor, water strainer, needle and cotton. He is maintained by the small but growing Manchester Buddhist community. His rules forbid him to possess or handle money. In May of that year, while Bhikkhu Panyavaddho was still residing in Thailand, the English Sangha Trust had been set up in London. Its aim was to promote the teachings of the Buddha in the United Kingdom by establishing an English branch of the Bhikkhu Sangha and by providing and maintaining residences for the Sangha's welfare. By December 1956, sufficient funds had been raised by the Trust to lease a house in London for a Sangha residence. Bhikkhu Kapilavado moved into the house at 50 Alexandra Road, Swiss Cottage, shortly thereafter. The address at Swiss Cottage soon became known as Sangha House. Bhikkhu Kapilavado's weekly teaching schedule often saw him in Manchester on weekends, presenting classes, talks and interviews in connection with the Manchester Buddhist Society's agenda. That timetable afforded Bhikkhu Panyavaddho an opportunity to consult with his teacher on a regular basis. The weekly teaching circuit also included trips to Leeds, Oxford, Cambridge and Brighton before returning to London. As the months passed, Bhikkhu Panyavaddho became increasingly concerned about his teacher's exhausting schedule and the effect it had on his health. In February 1957, after having resided only 5 months at the Manchester Buddhist Society, Bhikkhu Panyavaddho was summoned back to London. His help was needed because the burden of so many engagements had taken a serious toll on Bhikkhu Kapilavadho's health. As his health deteriorated further over the next several months, Bhikkhu Kapilavadho was forced to retire from the order and return to lay life. Bhikkhu Panyavaddho, his dutiful student, was asked to officiate at the disrobing ceremony in June 1957. That turn of fate placed the responsibility for the English Sangha Trust in the hands of Bhikkhu Panyavaddho, a monk of only 1 year. Though somewhat overwhelmed by the added duties and responsibilities, he assumed his new position with a calm and a sincerity that belied his junior status. Sangha House was now his to manage. Living with him were 2 German samaneras, Sanyavado and Sativado, who had come to stay in London with Bhikkhu Kapilavadho after meeting him on a lecture tour in Germany. The elderly Russian nun, Jan Ananda, also lived at Sangha House to help look after them. Bhikkhu Panyavaddho had suddenly become the teacher, tasked with training the other Sangha members and teaching the small group of lay people who came regularly to see him. His practice suddenly became the practice of teaching others. His main challenge at the beginning was focusing clearly on his own meditation practice. Time after time, when he sat down to meditate, his mind became distracted, and he was forced to constantly rein it in and refocus on the breath. His precipitous return to England, so soon after his ordination in Thailand, turned out to be a bigger challenge than he had expected. The main reason was that the monks he had ordained with had all given up the robe, and he was left alone holding the baby, as he would later say. That baby was the English Sangha Trust, which was a burdensome responsibility. During that period, Bhikkhu Panyavaddho's mother lived at her parents' house in Wales. At one point, she and his sister came for a visit at Sangha House in London. Upon arriving, they were ushered into a waiting room. They had not seen him for many years, and when Bhikkhu Panyavaddho entered the room, his mother was so overjoyed that she jumped up to hug her son. When she was told that the monastic code of discipline forbade him to have physical contact with her, she was deeply dismayed. She had not known about the rules. She refused to accept his new circumstances and never went to see her son again. In 1958, Bhikkhu Panyavaddho taught at the Buddhist Society Summer School for the first time. The Buddhist Society Summer School attempted to create the conditions necessary for students to engage in skillful conduct and to learn and discuss the practice of meditation, with the aim of developing a basic level of tranquility and insight. Every year, the Buddhist Society invited speakers to their summer school sessions, many of whom stayed and gave meditation courses. The Buddhist Society Summer School convened for 1 week every year on a large rural property where as many as 50 people regularly attended. Each person received a private room in a large country house. The atmosphere was relaxed and informal, lacking the strictness and formality of a retreat. Most of those present were adherents of either Zen or Theravada Buddhism, and they tended to form groups along those interests. Talking and socializing were tolerated at summer school, and the groups mingled freely at certain hours of the day. Bhikkhu Panyavaddho was tasked with giving instruction from the Theravada Buddhist perspective. Christmas Humphreys presented discourses on Zen Buddhism. Bhikkhu Panyavaddho gave 2 Dhamma talks a day, one of which was intended to be a good introduction for people who had a limited knowledge of Buddhism. The main thrust of his meditation course was mindfulness of breathing, leading to calm and concentration. When the opportunity arose, he also gave insightful explanations of such difficult topics as dependent origination. He was self-sacrificing and generous with his time, talking individually with each meditator about their experiences at least once a day. Bhikkhu Panyavaddho also accepted invitations to lead the meditation week at Oxford, which differed significantly in tone and intensity from the Buddhist Society Summer School. Following in Kapilavada's footsteps, he taught a strict Mahasi Sayadaw method of meditation, stressing the importance of mindfulness and clear comprehension. At the beginning of the week, he gave an instructional talk outlining the meditation procedure. Meditators were to anchor their attention on the rising and falling sensations of the abdomen during breathing, observing carefully any other feelings or thoughts that might arise. They were encouraged to sharpen their focus by making sure that the mind was attentive to the entirety of each process. Every bodily movement was to be done deliberately and with conscious attention to detail. Walking with exaggerated slowness at all times. Eating the meals in slow motion. At the same time, thoughts were carefully considered, and breaks in concentration noted. He stressed that such diligence should be carried out continuously throughout the day, the objective being a deep, clear, precise awareness of the mind and body. Oxford Meditation Week did not take place at Oxford University, but rather in a villa in the town of Oxford, which overlooked a wooded park. Meditators bunked in separate rooms, mingling only at mealtimes. All participants observed the 8 precepts, which included not eating after midday. No talking, reading, or entertainment was allowed. The whole day was devoted to a strict regimen of meditation practice under Bhikkhu Panyavaddho's instruction and guidance. Bhikkhu Panyavaddho also explained the fundamentals of Buddhist practice at various venues in London and in religious forums at Jesus College, Oxford. He believed fully and without reservation that the truth taught by the Buddha was a very important matter for human beings to understand. Many people were willing to practice methods that helped them live their lives in relative comfort. But in his teaching engagements, he rarely met people who were willing to reach beyond superficial techniques to the real fundamentals of Buddhist practice. In 1958, Bhikkhu Panyavaddho arranged for the higher ordinations of the 2 German Samaneras, who had been training under his guidance. In preparation, he tutored them thoroughly in the ordination procedure and in the Buddhist monastic rules. Then, at the culmination of a historic ceremony at the Thai embassy on July 2, 1958, Bhikkhus Dhammiko and Vimalo became the first Buddhist monks to be ordained on British soil. In September 1959, Bhikkhu Panyavaddho was invited to give a Dhamma talk in Victoria, near Buckingham Palace. A member of the audience was so impressed by what he heard that at the conclusion of the talk, he donated the sizable sum of £24,000 to the English Sangha Trust. In June 1960, a long-time supporter who was instrumental in the formation of the English Sangha Trust bequeathed a donation of £15,000 to the trust. As manager of the trust, Bhikkhu Panyavaddho maintained the integrity of those two donations, which several years later made it possible for the English Sangha Trust to purchase 3 properties for the Sangha's use. The house at 131 Haverstock Hill was purchased in September 1962 and the one next door at 129 Haverstock Hill in January 1963. Shortly thereafter, the country estate Biddulph Old Hall was purchased as a meditation centre. Even though Bhikkhu Panyavaddho approached Buddhist practice with a single-minded devotion and taught that practice with such tireless energy that his audience expanded continually as the years went by, still he did not feel comfortable in his position. The talks he gave on Buddhism were based primarily on theory rather than practice. Lacking sufficient practical experience to guide his discourse, he consistently referred to the Pali texts for his descriptions of the practice. He felt like a doctor who possessed expert medical knowledge, but did not have the talent to practice and cure an actual disease. How could he possibly help others to rid themselves of their defilements, as long as he still could not vanquish them from himself? Deep within his heart, he knew that, as soon as an opportunity presented itself, he must search for a teacher whom he could depend on for guidance. At some point, he discussed his desire with a Thai graduate student living in London, who agreed to locate the most renowned Thai meditation masters when he returned home. The graduate student's work as a mining engineer required him to travel to the Mekong River area, searching for mineral deposits. When traveling in the area, he liked to spend the night at a nearby monastery. He said he would be glad to ask people about the famous teachers residing in the area. Bhikkhu Panyavaddho's sojourn in Thailand had been brief and unsatisfying, his return to England lengthy and unfulfilling. Yet he sensed from the beginning that the answer to satisfaction and fulfillment lay in the faraway country of his ordination lineage. His stay in Thailand was so short that he had no time to learn the language, much less the customs. If he were to return one day, language would be important. He was sure of that. There being so few Thai people in London at that time, he found no chance to learn spoken Thai. He decided to teach himself by making an English translation of the meditation book that Ajahn Lun, the abbot of Wat Vivek Aram, had given him before he left. With the aid of a Thai-English dictionary and his own extensive knowledge of the Pali canon, he extracted the meaning, word by word, sentence by sentence, from the Thai original. Though slow and painstaking at the start, the process gained pace and fluency as he became more familiar with the Thai alphabet and the gist of the Thai text. By 1961, Bhikkhu Panyavaddho had completed his 100-page translation of Handbook for the Practice of Dhamma, which was eventually printed for free distribution by the Buddhist Association of Thailand. Excerpts of the translation were printed in Sangha, a journal published by members of the English Sangha Trust. Bhikkhu Panyavaddho made known his wish to return to Thailand for further training, and eventually a bhikkhu to replace him was arranged. On November 9, 1961, Bhikkhu Ananda Bodhi, a Canadian-born monk, arrived at Sangha House to take over responsibility for the English Sangha Trust. Free at last to pursue his goal, Bhikkhu Panyavaddho bid his supporters farewell, and on November 21st boarded a plane bound for Bangkok. The Buddhist Society later published this tribute to him in the Middle Way. On November 21st, Bhikkhu Panyavaddho left by air for Thailand, where he will continue his training in an atmosphere more conducive to progress than that of London. Peter Morgan was ordained in Thailand and returned to Britain after only a few months. Not long after his return, he found himself in charge of the English Sangha, and for the next 5 years was responsible for training new bhikkhus and samaneras and teaching the laity. This involved fortnightly visits throughout the year to Manchester and Leeds, and a host of other responsibilities which he never shirked, though they were not of his seeking. He has now decided that the time has come to get on with his own development. On 2nd November he conducted Mrs. Robbins's meditation class and was presented with a book. And on 9th November, the council presented him with further books and wished him every success in Thailand. He will be missed by many whom he has helped, but all such must remember that, as it has been said, the laity don't own bhikkhus, even when privileged to support them. A fine photograph of him now hangs in the entrance hall of the Society's premises, and we would also draw attention to the tape recording of 3 short talks made by him shortly before he left, and available on our usual terms. The association is most deeply indebted to Bhikkhu Panyavaddho. Under his guidance, the small, young movement grew and gained stability. This led to an increase in the number of members and a widening of its relationship with the general public. 2 magnificent donations given while he was bhikkhu in charge at Sangha House have made possible, among other things, the new vihara at 131 Haverstock Hill and the meditation centre at Biddulph, and have enabled the Sangha Trust to send the samaneras he trained to the east for further study. When he returned to Thailand, he left a movement as firmly established as is possible in this world of constant change. We owe and will continue to owe a debt of gratitude for his instruction in Dhamma.